rankings, position battle previews, and burning questions for the offense and defensive lines. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
Your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into your Monday episode of Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. And don't forget that you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're joining me on YouTube, please click that like button. It'll help other Commanders fans find the show just like you did. And if you want to continue this conversation, you can join me over on Subtext at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. And I'm your host, David Harrison, at DHarrison82 on Twitter, at DHarrison_82 on Threads, credential member of the media and Washington Commanders beat reporter for Commander Country, a part of Sports Illustrated's FanNation, covering your Washington Commanders. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with our everydayers. And as always, I appreciate you for your support of the show. On today's episode of Locked On Commanders, we're going back to our Monday preview, our position group preview series, and we're going into the trenches. And we're talking about offensive line. We're talking about defensive linemen here as we continue to progress and make our way towards NFL training camp. Only 2 full weeks left. And then in that third week, at the end of that third week, granted, it's the end of the week, but still in that third week, we will officially begin training camp. Before we dive into this preview, though, I do need to tell you today's episode brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs, which will help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. We're going to talk ranking and fantasy implications, maybe of some of the offensive line and defensive linemen this year. And we've got some burning questions for those units as well entering training camp. But before we get there, let's start as we have started, the last position group preview. We're going to continue that trend here in this one with the pre-training camp, entering training camp, starting depth chart for the offensive line. We're going to talk offensive line here, then we're going to move to the defensive line, and then we'll continue on with the episode. So entering into training camp, your starting offensive line, your starting 5 are going to be left tackle Charles Leno Jr., left guard is going to be Saahdiq Charles, your center is Nick Gates, your right guard is going to be Sam Cosmi, and your right tackle is going to be free agent signing Andrew Wylie. Now, moving into the training camp battles and storylines involving those 5 or even the depth guys, right? Well, I think the first storyline you have to look at is the fact that 4 of these 5 offensive linemen are new starters compared to last year's group. And I am including Sam Cosmi, who was last year's starting right tackle. I know he got some right guard burn, and that's fair. So if you don't want to count Sam among those, that's fine. You know, if that's your prerogative. It's still 3 out of 5. It's still over 50%. And that is a big turnover from one year to the next. So for me, I'm counting it as 4 because we've got a new starting right guard. You've got a new starting center, new starting left guard, and a new starting right tackle. The only constant, Charles Leno Jr., the left tackle. Lisa Saahdiq and Sam were on the team last year, right? So there's some continuity in that fashion. Nick Gates coming over from the New York Giants, Andrew Wylie coming over from the Kansas City Chiefs, but both of those guys bringing a little bit of edge in Nick Gates, a little bit of nastiness on the field, a little bit of attitude that I think this offensive line was maybe missing in some of the right ways, right? Andrew Norwell certainly had attitude. I don't know if it really benefited his teammates, though. I think Nick Gates' attitude will kind of benefit his teammates. Andrew Wylie brings that veteran savvy, experienced Super Bowl winner, and he knows Eric Bieniemy, so he's certainly already been having an impact on getting that offensive line unit ready for Eric Bieniemy's offense and helping them kind of accelerate the learning curve, because the ZB offense, it can be simple, but it can also be somewhat complicated. If you're looking for a position battle, I think Saahdiq Charles versus Chris Paul is probably the closest one we're going to get. We're going to talk a little bit about that as well, but 2 guys are kind of looking to prove themselves. Chris Paul's in his 2nd season after being a 7th round draft pick, and he's had some good things really kind of said about him. Saahdiq Charles looking to not only stay healthy, but also get into and hold a position on the starting offensive line. So we'll see what happens with those 2 guys. And I think the realist, maybe the most real, if you want to put it that way, position group battle here from the offensive line in training camp is going to be the battle for the swing tackle position. You've got Cornelius Lucas, I think probably has the inside track on that job, but then you've also got Trent Scott, who came over from the Pittsburgh Steelers, and you got Braden Daniels, who look, he's been called a guard. He's been called a tackle. He's listed by the Commanders on their official team website as an offensive lineman. I can tell you I've seen him get reps at both guard and tackle during the OTA minicamp period. But I think he probably does end up being more of a tackle. So I think I'm going to put him in kind of that swing tackle conversation. Again, I think Cornelius Lucas has the inside track on that job. And I think Braden Daniels and Trent Scott are kind of battling out to be the second swing tackle, which is kind of like the seventh guy on the offensive line. So some interesting facts and stats for the 2022 Washington Commanders offensive line group. From 2022 to 2023, the Commanders are losing 38 combined starts from last year this offseason. Andrew Norwell, who is still technically part of the team, but is expected to be released once he's healthy enough to actually be released. It had 16. Trey Turner had 12. Wes Schweitzer with 6. Chase Roulier with 2. And Nick Martin with 2. All of those starts, 38 in total, gone from this year's offensive line, which you kind of expect with all the turnover that we just discussed, right? Last year, the Commanders played 11 different offensive linemen as starters in 2022. So hopefully not going to have that many different starters this season. Another interesting stat from the 2022, really more of a looking into 2023, I suppose, but rookie center Ricky Stromberg could be the lowest snap count third-round pick as a rookie since Ron Rivera arrived. I don't know if I really said that very well. Basically, here's what I'm talking about. In 2022, Brian Robinson Jr., the Commanders' third-round pick, played on 351 snaps. 2021, Benjamin St-Juste was the third-round pick. He played 412. 2020, Antonio Gibson was Ron Rivera's first third-round pick with the Commanders, and AG played 405 snaps. But Ricky Stromberg expected to be the backup center. He's going to get some special teams reps here probably, maybe some big line stuff. He comes in, but if he doesn't hit at least 351 snaps, which it seems a little bit outside of injury, knock on wood, that's not a situation. But outside of injury, it doesn't seem likely that Ricky Stromberg will do that. So he will become the third-round pick from the Ron Rivera era to have the fewest snaps in his rookie season. So that's our quick bird's eye view dive of the offensive line. Flipping over to the defensive line, your starters entering training camp. I mean, we know this, right? Chase Young and Montez Sweat are your bookends. Your tackles are Jonathan Allen and Daron Payne. Camp battles and storylines, really it's about the backups and the depth, right? The backup defensive tackle battle, Fedarian Mathis, highly touted rookie last year, did a lot of good things in training camp and in the preseason, injured in the first week of the season, lost his entire rookie year because of it. John Ridgway ends up coming in. He did really, really well for himself. I think he surprised a lot of people with his play. He's got an injury right now, so they're kind of flip-flopping back and forth. Hopefully we get both these guys healthy for training camp and see which one of them is going to be DT number 3, which one's going to be DT number 4. Backup defensive end battle. James Smith-Williams, the veteran who's had to step up for this team multiple times over the last couple of years, versus KJ Henry, the rookie. Who's going to win that battle? Who's going to become the third defensive end on the field? And then you have the Chase Young and Montez Sweat contract race. The further we get into this, the more convinced I am that basically the Commanders are going to come out of this season, look at both of these guys and say, we want to go forward with you more than we want to go forward with the other guy. We're going to give you the contract. The other guy, thank you for your service, and you're going to be on your way. So some interesting facts and stats from 2022 among the defensive line. It's all about the defensive ends. Chase Young's last 11 starts actually predates 2022 a little bit. 31 tackles, 1.5 sacks, 5 quarterback hits, 3 tackles for loss. Montez Sweat, not same games, but his last 11 starts, 25 tackles, 5 sacks, 14 QB hits, and 8 tackles for loss. James Smith-Williams, his last 11 starts, 19 tackles, 2 sacks, 13 quarterback hits, 4 tackles for loss. So where they rank in tackles, Chase Young is leading the 3, but then you've got Sweat, then you've got Smith-Williams. In sacks, it's Sweat, Smith-Williams, and Young, and it's that same order. Montez Sweat, James Smith-Williams, Chase Young in sacks, quarterback hits, and tackles for losses in each player's last 11 starts. If you give a point value, 1 for first place, 2 for second place, 3 for third place, and average them out, Montez Sweat is leading the trio with an average of 1.25. James Smith-Williams is second with 2.25. Chase Young pulling up the rear with 2.5. So I think if you're Chase Young, you've got to at least produce better than what James Smith-Williams has been doing in your absence. You've got to meet and beat those numbers to get a new contract. So those are some storylines, some battles for the defensive line, our bird's eye view of both sides of the trenches. Next up, we're going to talk about a burning question from each unit, and that's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we're doing that thanks to our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free, and it's so easy to post a job that even I could do it if I was actually hiring people, but I'm not, but you are. And once you get your job posted, throw the purple hashtag hiring frame on your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you are hiring. Simple tools like screening questions are going to make it easy for you to focus in on candidates with the right skills and experience so that you can quickly isolate the people you want to talk to and the people that you want to hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thanks for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or your first view of the day every day. Speaking of everydayers, we got a brand new mailbag episode dropping tomorrow. And again, just a couple of full weeks left until the beginning of training camp. So if you want to throw down your questions, we've already got some that we've got to stash away. But if you want to throw down some questions, throw them in the YouTube comments, hit me on Twitter, email, Subtexters, you know what to do. Or if you want to join Subtext, join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders, and you can get in on all that fun, and you can talk to me straight through your text messaging. It's super easy. Speaking of Subtext, our Commanders Subtexters sent me some burning questions for Washington's offensive and defensive line groups, and we're going to get started with the offensive side of things. And basically, I got the same question in different ways. I got one saying, well, not so happy. Are we really starting Saahdiq Charles at left guard? Generally speaking, what's up with the left guard spot, right? That's really what the question is. And somebody asked, why hasn't Andrew Norwell been released yet? I think it just basically kind of covered that. He's recovering from an injury. He's on the PUP, physically unable to perform list. He can't be released until he comes off of that thing. So basically, once he's healthy enough to come off of the PUP, then he will be released, at which time he will then continue his NFL career elsewhere. But basically, what's going on with the left guard spot? Again, last year, Andrew Norwell manned that spot for all but one game. That one game was against the Dallas Cowboys. Chris Paul started that game, if I remember correctly. And I know Chris Paul started the last game. I think Andrew Norwell started every other game before that. So with this year's left guard spot, you basically have Saahdiq Charles, who is in there right now as the #1. And you got Chris Paul, last year's 7th-round draft pick. And really, it's similar to the quote-unquote position battle that we're seeing at quarterback between Sam Howell and Jacoby Brissett. Only the circumstances as far as contextualizing the player is flipped, right? So in the quarterback situation, you've got the young quarterback playing on a rookie deal, Sam Howell, who is getting the first-team reps. It's considered a battle, right? But it's Sam Howell getting first crack to win the job. And by getting first crack and winning the job, he's getting all the first-team reps. Jacoby Brissett getting all the second-team reps. So basically, we're seeing the same situation with the left guard spot, except the young guy, Chris Paul, is the backup. The older guy, he's not an old guy, right? But the older guy, Saahdiq Charles, is the guy who is #1 right now, getting first crack at winning or losing the job. Now, Saahdiq Charles, again, all first-team reps in OTAs, all the first-team reps during the minicamp, and so far, limited contact, no pads. So it's, again, take it with a grain of salt, but so far you've seen nothing to suggest that he is going to be losing his grip on that job anytime soon. Now, going back through his history, played only one game in 2020, his rookie year, due to injury, played 10 games with 4 starts in 2021, played 13 games with 3 starts last year in 2022. So career high in games played last year, but not as career high in games started. Has suffered multiple injuries during the course of those 3 seasons to ankle, foot, calf, knee, concussion, and he's been sick. Like he's had a lot of injuries, a lot of issues that he had to deal with over the last few years. But when he's on the field, has looked for the most part solid, especially when you consider this is a guy who hasn't gotten to get a whole lot of repetition, a whole lot of runway, kind of get into a groove and be on the field consistently. Graded as high as 67.6 overall by PFF. That's a light shade of yellowish green, right? So borderline green, but still in the yellow. That came in 2021. Considered a better run blocker than he is a pass blocker. But Coach Ron Rivera, offensive coordinator, assistant head coach Eric Bieniemy, and assistant offensive line coach Travell Wharton, who will be the offensive line coach. I did get a question about that as well for the burning questions. from a subtexter about what's going on with the offensive line coach position. Travell Wharton is officially right now the assistant offensive line coach, but he will be the offensive line coach. Coach Rivera has said that they're basically just waiting on the new ownership situation to take hold. Once that happens, they can execute some new contracts. Travell Wharton is your offensive line coach. So they're operating that way already. So just kind of, put it in your brain that Travell Wharton is the offensive line coach. All three of those guys, though, have all come out and supported Saahdiq Charles and his efforts and his ability to be a starting left guard for this team. So, some of that could be coach speak, certainly, but that's just kind of the situation that we're in. Chris Paul, really, it's all about potential, right? And Coach Rivera also mentioned this offseason that there were defensive guys who came to him and said, Coach, you got to keep an eye on this kid. Coach, you got to talk about this kid. Zach Selby reported on those quotes in his defensive line preview series, I want to say. So make sure you read that. I read a lot of Zach stuff. Zach's a cool guy, but also very good at his job. So make sure you're reading Zach Selby stuff at commanders.com. So Coach Vera being approached by other defensive players unsolicited, telling him, this Chris Paul guy is for real. So there's some positives, some upside there. Only the one start right against the Dallas Cowboys, but he did end up with the second highest run blocking grade among Commanders guards in 2022 with a 56.9 pass blocking grade to go along with it. Coming out of Tulsa in 2022, he had the sixth highest athleticism grade of all guards at the NFL Scouting Combine. So I think that's really something that this Commanders offense, especially with Eric Bieniemy, a lot of pulling, a lot of shifting, a little bit of everything. I think that's something that will really help Chris Paul accelerate his growth within the Eric Bieniemy system. So good question, offensive side of things. What's up with the left guard spot? Again, I got multiple versions of it, but essentially all asking kind of what's going on with that spot. Defensive side of things, how big of an impact will Chase Young make on the defense this year from a defensive standpoint, not from a personal standpoint, right? And that's a tough question to answer because honestly, my kind of question, my question back to that would be how much of an impact is there left to make, right? So when you look at this Washington Commanders defense last year, 7th fewest in points allowed in 2022. In fact, if you expand that a little bit, only 2 NFC playoff teams, the San Francisco 49ers and the Dallas Cowboys, gave up fewer points in 2022. Those are the only 2 teams. And the Dallas Cowboys only gave up 1 fewer point than the Washington Commanders. That's probably an extra point. You know what I'm saying? So it's not really like the defense did it. So only the Niners, only the Cowboys gave up fewer points and made the playoffs than the Washington Commanders. That means 5 NFC playoff teams, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the New York Giants, the Minnesota Vikings, the Seattle Seahawks, and the Philadelphia Eagles all gave up, surrendered more points to opponents last year, but all of them made the postseason. So it's really not a question to me of how good can the defense be? How good will the defense be? The defense is already there. The defense is already a playoff postseason caliber team. And once you're in the tournament, you have a shot at the title. You know what I mean? So to me, the defense is already there in terms of, is this team ready to compete for a championship? What needs to catch up is the offense, right? And that's where Eric Bieniemy hopefully is going to come in. That's where some of these young guys, Brian Robinson, John Dodson, Cole Turner, in their second seasons. And that's where hopefully Sam Howell can be smart enough to distribute, be the point guard, and get the ball in the right hands. But back to defense, right? So we look at some other rankings here in 2022 to find where Chase Young can make his impact. The defense was 11th in yards per play, so that's really solid. 16th in rush yards per play, top half. 10th in pass yards per play, always want to be top 10. 6th in sack rate, better than top 10. And then they were first in fewest first downs per game, third down defense, and goal to go defense. Literally can't get better. I mean, you can always get better, right? But from a statistical performance, production-based standpoint, that's what this is, production-based business, can't get any better than what the Commanders did last year. So where can Chase make his biggest impacts? I think yards per run, right? If we go back to that trio comparison, him, Montez Sweat, and James Smith-Williams, he had the most tackles. I think that's significant. And I think if Chase Young can play within his assignment, but also make those tackles at or behind the line of scrimmage or yard or 2 past the line of scrimmage, that will help the yards per run play average come down, get them into the top 10, top 12, wherever you can get in there. And then interception rate. Faster quarterback pressures means quicker throws from quarterbacks, means more aggressive defensive backs. And you already know Emmanuel Forbes, Quan Martin specifically, both those young guys are really looking to read quarterbacks and make aggressive plays. And even when opposing offenses try to hit him with a double move, if your quarterback doesn't have time, the double move doesn't matter. If he can demand double teams, Chase Young, if he can get his play this year to a point where teams have to dedicate extra blockers to him, that's fewer weapons for opposing offense because they're already doubling or they're already committing extra guys to Daron, Payne, Jonathan Allen. Montez Sweat does some good things. If both those guys can kick it up a notch, really force opposing offenses to minimize their own weapons on the field, you're doing part of the offenses, or you're doing part of your secondary job for them just by taking receivers, running backs, and tight ends off the field or out of the passing tree. So that's kind of where I think Chase Young can probably make his biggest impact. Post-training camp depth chart projections on the O-line. I think we've got the unit set, guys. I think Charles Leno is going to be your left tackle. I think Saahdiq Charles is going to be your left guard. Nick Gates at center. Sam Cosmi right guard. Andrew Wylie right tackle. I really don't think, while there's a battle, quote unquote, between Saahdiq Charles and Chris Paul, I really don't see it going any other way than Saahdiq Charles. Again, outside of injuries, knock on wood, that doesn't happen. I do think Cornelius Lucas, Trent Scott, Chris Paul, Braden Daniels, Ricky Stromberg all make the active roster. That gives you 10 offensive linemen. Maybe they go with an additional one. The rest of them are probably going to the practice squad. Defensive line, again, you're starting four set: Young, Allen, Payne, and Sweat. James Smith-Williams, you can't not have him on the active roster if he's healthy. KJ Henry, John Ridgeway, Fedarian Mathis, those are your backups. Again, you might get F.A. Obata, Casey Tuhill, Abdul Anderson. Like, those are certainly guys that could compete for active spots depending on how many they want to keep. But those are the ones that I'll project here right now. Of course, we'll do our full initial 53-man projection at the end of training camp. But to close this season, we're going to take a look at some rankings for the offensive line, defensive line. That's next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders. And we're doing all of this thanks to our friends over at Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs make you look good with stretch khaki shorts that are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. They achieve this by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki, but it stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Plus, Bird Dogs use anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that helps keep you cool and dry all day long. I just took my son and his best friend up to New York for the weekend, and I was in Bird Dogs the entire time. They are my go-to for any time I have to travel. And the football season coming up, I got to travel a lot. So when you travel, or when you're just looking to lounge, if I'm just sitting out on the back porch or sitting out on the back deck, I do the exact same thing. If I can be in my Bird Dogs joggers or my Bird Dog shorts, I am in them. Believe me, I'm actually looking to get up some of the pairs of khakis for the NFL season as well, so I can even be in the press box in my Bird Dogs. It's just going to be Bird Dogs 365, 24/7. Go to birddogs.com/lockedonnfl right now, and you will get a Yeti-style tumbler. We're showing them off. I had this. I took it with me to New York. It goes with me if I am doing this, or if I am in my car, this tumbler is with me. So just this, even if you don't love the shorts or the pants like I do, the tumbler is worth the price of admission. That's birddogs.com/lockedonnfl to get your Yeti style tumbler. You're not going to want to take your Bird Dogs off, and you're going to want to drink out of your Bird Dogs tumbler everywhere you go. I promise you that. Finishing up this offensive line, defensive line position group preview episode with some rankings. Position group Monday leading us up to training camp week. And we're going to start off with PFF ranking the offensive line. Sam Monson of Pro Football Focus ranks the Commanders' offensive line number 27. Now that's down from number 20 at the end of the regular season. PFF and Monson project Stromberg to be the starter at center, and they project Gates to be the starter at left guard. That is not what it looks like on the practice field. I'm not going to lie. I thought that had a little bit of chance. I thought maybe Stromberg, Gates, one of them guard, one of them center, had some potential as well at the beginning, like pre-rookie minicamp. But looking at the team, what they've done at rookie camp, at OTA's minicamp, it doesn't look that way. It looks like Gates at center, and it looks like Saahdiq Charles at left guard. Talks about the significant turnover. Look, I'm not mad at the number 27 overall ranking. Hopefully you guys aren't either. I mean, with this much turnover, it's just really hard to say this is what I expect from this unit before you ever see them put pads on. So you kind of have to expect a lower grade just because of that. But I do think that the positions they replaced, unfortunately, Chase Roulier with the injuries, Andrew Norwell with some of his struggles, Trey Turner and all, I think they made the replacements at the right place. And if you're going to do a 3/5, 4/5 replacement of your starting offensive line, I think this team made the right decisions on which pieces they replaced first. So that significant turnover, certainly an impact there. Sorry. So all the changes, Sam also says all the changes don't help Sam Howell. Honestly, I don't know how much that really impacts, to be completely honest with you. I don't think it's really that big of a deal. Because even if he had last year's offensive line, like let's say the starting five from last year was completely intact, he didn't practice with him all last year, right? He wasn't a starting quarterback. So he only got 1 week of practice with him, only one game. And even in that game, both Cosmi and Leno started the game that Sam Howell did. They're both on the starting five. So, I mean, 2/5 of it, right? Chris Paul was also on that starting lineup, not in the starting lineup right now, but he was still there at least. Looking at some individual rankings, Pro Football Focus ranks Charles Leno Jr. the 30th overall offensive tackle in the National Football League. Sam Cosmi is the 31st graded or ranked guard. Turning over to the defense, PFF has this team's defensive line third in the NFL, and they wrote, quote, "It remains to be seen whether edge defender Chase Young will still be on the roster when the season kicks off. But as things stand, Washington's starting defensive line consists of four former first-round picks. The interior is led by Jonathan Allen, who is graded among the top 20 interior defenders for 3 straight seasons. And on the edge, they have Montez Sweat, who earned a career-high 86.4 grade that ranked 8th among players at the position last season." End quote. So the national media continues to be obsessed with the idea of trading Chase Young. And I'm not going to pretend we haven't talked about it here on this show, but since the draft, I mean, yeah, if it happens, I will be really, really surprised, guys. That's all I'm going to say. I don't see it happening. But, we're going to keep talking about it because the national media keeps talking about it. Niners and Eagles, the only teams that were ranked ahead of Washington here in defensive line grades. Those are 2 pretty solid defensive lines, so I don't necessarily hate that. Next best after Washington in the NFC were the Dallas Cowboys. So from number 3 to number 8, all AFC teams. Number 8, Dallas Cowboys, were the next highest ranking. So you have the Eagles, Commanders, and Cowboys, all in the top 10 defensive lines. Good luck, NFC East quarterbacks. It's going to be do a lot of cardio. There's going to be a lot of running this season. CBS Sports gave Washington's interior defensive line, so Daron, Payne, Jonathan Allen, an honorable mention in its top 10 defensive position group rankings. So that was an interesting way of going about it. And then as far as fantasy, look, there are no offensive line fantasy rankings. You're not drafting offensive linemen, but keep an eye on this offensive line during training camp. Keep in touch with the news, the notes. This show, obviously, we're going to be talking about it after every practice. Subtexters, you're going to be getting live text during training camp practices from me. And if that's something you want to know in real time, how do the blocks look, especially once the pads come on, by all means, I'll shoot those to you as well. So, though, keep an eye on that update. And then obviously preseason, depending on when you draft, hopefully you get to see at least 2 preseason games before you draft. If not, you're kind of drafting blind, but keep an eye on that offensive line, man. Because if that offensive line looks improved, that will certainly improve position play by Brian Robinson Jr. and Antonio Gibson. So, if you're kind of targeting, like, say, B-Rob in, like, I don't know, the 6th round, and you see this offensive line doing really well, maybe you want to bump that up to the 5th round. Individual defensive players, not every league uses them. Some leagues do use them. My money league does use them, but defensive linemen aren't usually targets there. The top 162 individual defensive players listed by Fantasy Pros, Kayvon Thibodeau is the lowest ranked defensive end on the list out of the top 162. He's the 10th ranked defensive end. So the top 10 defensive ends come in near the bottom 162, number 127 overall. For what it's worth, Montez Sweat had more sacks, 8 sacks compared to Thibodeau's 4, only 3 fewer tackles, 15 more quarterback hits. But Kayvon Thibodeau did have a fumble return for a touchdown. That's huge for his fantasy status. So maybe that's why he got the edge. But don't draft defensive linemen as your individual defensive players. I think that's kind of the point. So not a lot of fantasy relevancy there outside of maybe what they can do for your team. So, again, going back to what can Chase Young really do for this defense. Look, if he's getting home, if you make Cameron Curl, for example, your individual defensive player, Cam might get some more interception opportunities because the defensive front is getting better pressure. So that's how they're going to impact your fantasy. You're not going to draft them, but they could have an impact. Just keep an eye for those news and notes during training camp. And then obviously keep an eye on the preseason games to see how they're firing off. Speaking of firing off, that's going to wrap it up for today's episode. Coming up tomorrow, another mailbag episode. If you want to get your question in for that or future episodes, drop them in the YouTube comments, email them to lockedoncommanders@gmail.com. Hit me on Twitter at dharrison82. Hit me on Threads at dharrison_82, or hit me at Subtext. As always, thank you so much for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day every day. And every day, thank you for coming through on a consistent basis like you do. Remember, you can continue this conversation with me on Subtext. Just go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Thank you so much for making me a part of your day, part of your routine. And if you have anything else Washington Commanders related you want to know or want to discuss, make sure you also follow me on Twitter at dharrison82. Until we speak again, please be safe, be kind, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.